purpose of my speech is to persuade all of you that we need to abolish the death penalty. There are many reasons that support us abolishing the death penalty, but I am going to cover two main reasons. They are cost and the execution of innocent people. A death sentence is more expensive to carry out than a sentence of life in prison without parole. According to an article titled Costs of Capital Punishment in California, written by Judge Arthur Alarcon and Professor Paula Mitchell in 2011, published by Loyola Law Review of Los Angeles, the cost of the death penalty in California has totaled over $4 billion since 1978. Of this amount, $1.94 billion were pretrial and trial costs, $925 million were automatic appeals, $775 million were federal habeas corpus appeals, and $1 billion of these costs went to incarceration. If the sentences of every person on death row at this time were committed to life without parole, the state of California would see an immediate savings of $170 million per year. Over 20 years, this amount would add up to a savings of over $5 billion. According to the Death Penalty Information Center, a study found that defendants who had less than $320,000 towards their defense in representation costs had a 44% chance of being given the death penalty. The website innocenceproject.org details stories of 18 persons who have served time on death row and were then proven innocent or exonerated by DNA testing. Two of these cases were those of Frank Lee Smith and Curtis McCarty. A frontline story on pbs.org details the account of Frank Lee Smith's trial, conviction, and sentencing of the death penalty. This is a picture of Frank Lee Smith. April 15th of 1985, 8-year-old Chandra Whitehead was raped and murdered. There were no eyewitnesses to her murder and no physical evidence at the scene of the crime linking Frank Lee Smith to her murder. As a matter of fact, the only evidence that the prosecution had were two witnesses who claimed that they had seen a man matching the description of Frank Lee Smith in the area at the time of the crime. Frank Lee Smith was 37 years old when he was tried, convicted, and given the death penalty. Frank Lee Smith died from cancer January 30th of 2000 while still serving time on death row. He was proven innocent by DNA testing December 15th of 2000. The story of Curtis McCarty can be found on the National Registration of Exonerations. This is a project maintained by Michigan and Northwest Law Schools. Here's a picture of Curtis McCarty. December 10th, 1982, 18-year-old Pamela K. Willis was found murdered in her home. She was naked, had been stabbed, strangled, and raped. Police considered McCarty a possible suspect because he had been an acquaintance of the victim. In 1983, not long after the murder, forensic analyst Joyce Gilchrist compared hairs found at the crime scene to those of Curtis McCarty. She found that they were not similar. 2 years passed with no arrest, and in 1985, Miss Gilchrist changed her notes. She reversed her findings and stated that the hairs could have been a match. In March of 1986, Gilchrist claimed that it was very likely McCrary had been at the scene. The hairs were a match, and his blood type matched the blood type of sperm found on the body. At the age of 20, Curtis McCarty was convicted, tried, and given the death penalty. McCarty spent 22 years behind bars. 19 of these were on death row. Testing of DNA evidence in 2002 showed that the sperm found on the body did not match the DNA of Curtis McCarty. In 2007, he was finally freed. Joyce Gilchrist also helped to send 23 other defendants to death row during her 21 years with the Oklahoma City Police Department. Both of these stories of murder are horrible and sad, but two innocent men being convicted of crimes and sentenced to death only adds to the tragedy. How many of you have been seen in a neighborhood? How many of you are an acquaintance? How many of you have $320,000 to pay a defense attorney? We need to abolish the death penalty because the next story could be mine, yours, perhaps one of your parents, and maybe even a sister or a brother.